Welcome to another deep analysis where we examine the forces that shape our world behind the headlines. Today, we decode perhaps the most dangerous calculation in modern geopolitics, the strategic value of a single island that both the United States and China consider worth a potential global conflict. This month, satellite intelligence confirmed what defense analysts have been tracking in silence for 18 months. Military installations across the Taiwan Strait have been systematically upgraded, supply chains have been quietly reorganized, and strategic reserve accumulations have reached levels not seen since the Cold War. While diplomatic channels maintain the language of peaceful resolution, the physical evidence tells a different story entirely. Taiwan has become the focal point of preparations that suggest both superpowers are calculating scenarios where compromise becomes impossible. The island's strategic value has transcended traditional geopolitical metrics and entered territory where mathematical necessity overrides diplomatic preference. Official statements from Washington and Beijing continue to emphasize stability and peaceful resolution through established diplomatic frameworks. Trade relationships remain functional, cultural exchanges proceed normally, and both capitals publicly dismiss speculation about military confrontation as counterproductive to regional prosperity. Yet beneath this carefully maintained surface, a different conversation is taking place. Military procurement patterns, industrial capacity relocations, and strategic partnership arrangements reveal preparation for scenarios that official discourse actively avoids acknowledging. The gap between public positioning and private preparation has never been wider, suggesting both powers are operating under assumptions they cannot publicly articulate. The silence becomes more significant when examined against the backdrop of Taiwan's unique position in global systems that neither superpower can afford to lose control over, yet neither can openly claim without triggering the very confrontation they're preparing for. Taiwan's strategic importance operates across multiple interconnected layers, each creating dependencies that amplify the island's value exponentially. Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company produces over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors, the 3-nanometer and 5-nanometer chips that power everything from smartphones to artificial intelligence systems to military guidance systems. This isn't market dominance through competitive advantage, it's technological monopoly through irreplaceable infrastructure. The fabrication facilities, known as fabs, represent investments exceeding $20 billion each and require supply chains that span dozens of countries. More critically, the institutional knowledge, the human expertise required to operate these facilities, exists nowhere else on Earth at this scale and sophistication level. Rebuilding this capacity outside Taiwan would require a minimum of 7 to 10 years, assuming unlimited resources and perfect cooperation from current supply partners. Both the United States and China understand that control over Taiwan means control over the technological foundation of 21st century economic and military power. Neither can permit the other exclusive access to this capability without accepting permanent strategic subordination. Taiwan sits at the center of the world's busiest shipping lanes. More than $3 trillion in annual trade passes through the Taiwan Strait, representing roughly 25% of all global maritime commerce. The island's position creates what strategists call a geographic gate, a narrow passage that can be controlled, monitored, or closed by whoever holds the territory. For China, Taiwan represents the key to breaking what they perceive as the first island chain, a defensive perimeter that currently limits Chinese naval projection into the Pacific. Control of Taiwan would provide unrestricted access to deepwater ports and eliminate the geographic constraints that currently contain Chinese maritime expansion. For the United States, Taiwan serves as the critical link in a defensive network that has guaranteed American Pacific dominance for 70 years. Loss of Taiwan would collapse the strategic architecture that projects American power across 60% of the world's ocean surface. Taiwan's economy has been deliberately integrated into global financial systems in ways that make its disruption catastrophic for both Chinese and American economic interests. The island serves as a crucial intermediary in supply chains that connect American consumers to Chinese manufacturing, while simultaneously hosting the technological components that make Chinese industrial expansion possible. More subtly, Taiwan has become a testing ground for financial technologies and regulatory frameworks that both superpowers intend to deploy globally. Control over Taiwan means influence over the development of digital currencies, AI-driven financial systems, and next-generation economic governance models. But the implications extend beyond immediate strategic value. The mathematics of the Taiwan situation have created what strategists term a commitment trap, a scenario where backing down becomes more costly than escalating, regardless of the risks involved. For the United States, abandoning Taiwan would signal to every ally that American security guarantees are contingent rather than absolute. Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Australia would be forced to recalculate their strategic positions, potentially leading to a cascade of accommodation with Chinese regional dominance. The cost of maintaining American global leadership requires demonstrating that challenges to American strategic commitments trigger responses that make those challenges unsustainable. For China, accepting permanent Taiwan independence would validate what Beijing views as foreign interference in Chinese territorial integrity. More significantly, it would establish precedent that Chinese strategic objectives can be frustrated by external resistance, potentially encouraging similar resistance in Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, and the South China Sea. The domestic legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party has been increasingly tied to the narrative of China as inevitable reunification, a narrative that cannot accommodate permanent failure without undermining the party's foundational justification for power. Both nations are operating under the assumption that whoever achieves decisive technological superiority first will be able to resolve the Taiwan question on their terms without triggering full-scale conflict. This has accelerated military modernization programs, cyber warfare capabilities, and economic coercion techniques to timelines that create inherent instability. The American approach focuses on maintaining technological advantages that make Chinese military action prohibitively costly, while strengthening Taiwan's defensive capabilities to the point where successful invasion becomes mathematically impossible. The Chinese approach emphasizes developing capabilities that can neutralize American technological advantages, while creating economic and diplomatic pressures that make American intervention politically unsustainable. Both strategies require continuous escalation of capabilities and commitments, creating a dynamic where each side's defensive preparations appear as offensive threats to the other. Demographic and economic trends are compressing the timeline for resolution in ways that favor action over patience. China's aging population and slowing economic growth create political pressures for success, while the nation retains its current strength. American concerns about relative economic decline and domestic political sustainability create similar pressures for resolving the challenge, while American advantages remain decisive. This temporal compression means both sides are operating with shortened planning horizons that emphasize near-term position over long-term stability. What makes the Taiwan situation uniquely dangerous is the extent to which both superpowers are preparing for scenarios they cannot publicly acknowledge while maintaining diplomatic positions that preclude the compromises necessary to avoid those scenarios. American military exercises in the Pacific have shifted from hypothetical training scenarios to specific operational rehearsals. Joint training with allied forces now focuses on precise Taiwan contingencies, supply chain protection under wartime conditions, and coordination of economic sanctions designed to make Chinese military action economically catastrophic. Chinese military preparations have moved beyond traditional invasion planning to comprehensive strategies for controlling Taiwan's economic relationships, cyber infrastructure, and information environment. The goal appears to be creating conditions where Taiwan's choice becomes accommodation or isolation, rather than accommodation or military conflict. Perhaps most significantly, both sides are preparing their domestic populations for scenarios that current diplomatic language suggests are unthinkable. Public opinion management, economic resilience planning, and strategic communication frameworks all suggest both governments are calculating probabilities that their public positions explicitly reject. Beyond the visible military preparations, both nations have been systematically building economic weapons designed specifically for the Taiwan scenario. The United States has created financial mechanisms that can instantly sever Chinese access to dollar-denominated transactions, effectively cutting off approximately 60% of China's international trade overnight. These mechanisms extend beyond traditional sanctions to include automated systems that can halt specific categories of industrial components, rare earth minerals, and technological services that Chinese manufacturing depends on. China has responded by developing parallel systems designed to economically isolate Taiwan without triggering the military tripwires that would justify American intervention. These include comprehensive cyber capabilities targeting Taiwan's power grid, financial networks and communication systems, as well as economic pressure points that can make Taiwan's international trade relationships unsustainable without direct Chinese cooperation. Both approaches represent preparations for economic warfare at scales that would affect global commerce for years, yet both are being developed as alternatives to military conflict that both sides acknowledge could be catastrophically destructive. The Taiwan equation is complicated by alliance structures that automatically expand any conflict beyond the three primary actors. American security treaties with Japan and South Korea contain language that could trigger mutual defense obligations in Taiwan scenarios. Australia's integration into American Pacific strategy creates similar automatic escalation potentials. More significantly, China's partnerships with Russia and North Korea have created what intelligence analysts call coordination scenarios, agreements for mutual support in conflicts involving their respective primary adversaries. This means any Taiwan conflict carries the inherent risk of simultaneous confrontations across multiple theaters, from the Korean Peninsula to Eastern Europe. The mathematics of these alliance obligations create what strategists term entanglement risk, the possibility that relatively contained conflicts expand automatically through pre-existing commitments that none of the parties can abandon without destroying their credibility for all future scenarios. Both the United States and China maintain nuclear arsenals specifically designed to make the costs of losing any existential confrontation prohibitive for the other side. The Taiwan situation represents the first scenario since the Cuban Missile Crisis where both nuclear powers have identified an issue where backing down might be perceived as more dangerous than escalating. American nuclear doctrine has been quietly modified to include scenarios where Chinese control of Taiwan represents an unacceptable shift in the strategic balance that justifies nuclear risk-taking to prevent. Chinese nuclear modernization has focused specifically on capabilities designed to deter American intervention in scenarios Beijing defines as matters of Chinese territorial integrity. Neither side intends nuclear conflict, but both have structured their nuclear forces to make credible their willingness to accept nuclear risk rather than accept defeat on issues they define as existential. Taiwan has become the test case for whether this mutual deterrent remains stable when both sides have comparable reasons to believe they cannot afford to lose. Emerging technologies are changing the Taiwan calculation in ways that neither superpower fully understands yet. Artificial intelligence systems are being deployed for both surveillance and decision-making in ways that could escalate conflicts faster than human decision-makers can control. Cyber warfare capabilities have reached the point where critical infrastructure can be disabled without triggering traditional military responses, creating scenarios where one side could achieve decisive advantages without crossing thresholds that justify full retaliation. Space-based systems have become critical to both sides' Taiwan strategies, creating vulnerabilities that extend the potential conflict beyond traditional terrestrial boundaries. Both nations are developing capabilities to disable or destroy satellite networks that support the other side as military communications, navigation systems, and intelligence gathering. Perhaps most significantly, both sides are racing to deploy autonomous weapon systems that could continue operations even if traditional command and control systems are compromised. This creates scenarios where conflicts could continue escalating, even if political leaders on both sides wanted to halt them. China's internal demographic pressures create timeline constraints that make the Taiwan situation more urgent rather than less. An aging population, declining birth rates, and the economic challenges of supporting a growing elderly population with a shrinking workforce create pressures for resolving the Taiwan issue while China retains its current economic and military strength. These demographic realities affect not just China's capabilities, but its domestic political calculations. The Chinese Communist Party has tied its legitimacy increasingly to narratives of national rejuvenation that explicitly include Taiwan reunification. Failure to achieve this goal while China retains the capability to do so could undermine the party's fundamental justification for power in ways that domestic economic success cannot compensate for. American demographic trends create different but parallel pressures. An increasingly polarized domestic political environment makes sustained international commitments more difficult to maintain, while economic challenges associated with aging infrastructure and social programs create pressure to reduce expensive international obligations. These demographic realities mean both sides are operating with compressed timelines that favor decisive action over patient diplomacy. The Taiwan situation has created strategic calculations that extend far beyond the immediate participants. Regional powers from India to Indonesia are being forced to choose sides in ways that will define economic and security relationships for decades. Japan has begun military preparations that explicitly assume Chinese control of Taiwan would make Japan's own security untenable, leading to defense spending increases and military capability developments that represent the most significant shifts in Japanese security policy since World War II. South Korea faces the impossible choice between economic relationships with China that are essential for Korean prosperity and security relationships with the United States that are essential for Korean survival. Southeast Asian nations are being forced to choose between Chinese economic integration that offers immediate benefits and American security partnerships that promise long-term protection from Chinese dominance. These choices are being made under time pressure that prevents the careful balancing that characterized regional diplomacy for the past 30 years. The cumulative effect is the formation of opposing blocs that eliminate the strategic ambiguity that previously prevented conflicts from becoming inevitable. Both superpowers are engaged in comprehensive information campaigns designed to shape global perceptions of the Taiwan situation in ways that support their respective strategic objectives. These campaigns extend beyond traditional propaganda to include sophisticated manipulation of social media, economic data, and academic research that influences how other nations calculate their own interests in the Taiwan scenario. American information strategies emphasize the economic and security benefits of supporting democratic governance and free trade, while highlighting the risks that Chinese regional dominance would pose to smaller nations' sovereignty. Chinese information strategies emphasize the historical legitimacy of reunification and the economic benefits of accepting Chinese regional leadership, while highlighting the costs and risks of supporting American interventionism. These information campaigns are designed not just to influence public opinion, but to affect the calculations of political leaders who must decide whether their national interests align with supporting one side or the other in a potential Taiwan conflict. The Taiwan equation has evolved beyond traditional geopolitical competition into a calculation where each side's definition of acceptable outcomes excludes what the other side considers existential requirements. Mathematics, geography, technology, and time have created a strategic situation where the costs of compromise may exceed the risks of confrontation for both parties. The question is no longer whether Taiwan's strategic value justifies the risks associated with controlling it. The question is whether either superpower can afford to allow the other to answer that question first. And increasingly, the answer from both sides appears to be no. Thank you for joining this analysis. The forces shaping our world often operate beneath the surface of daily headlines, in the realm of strategic calculation where long-term necessity shapes short-term action. Understanding these deeper currents provides insight into why certain conflicts become inevitable, not because leaders choose confrontation, but because the alternatives become mathematically impossible. Subscribe for more deep analysis of the strategic forces that will define our future. And remember that in geopolitics, the most dangerous conflicts are those where both sides have compelling reasons to believe they cannot afford to lose.